would like to note that there's been a significant amount of conversation about a book, quote, banned in Florida, in Duval County. Now, I'm not an expert on the subject because I don't live there, but my understanding is that that book is on the shelf. The book in question about Rosa Parks, the book in question about Roberto Clemente that was raised and so forth, that those books are on the shelf after a review process that they went through, having pulled certain books based on certain questions raised, and that those books are back on the shelf. And in fact, the commissioner, the Florida Commissioner of Education, I don't know if that's the exact title, has actually promoted that Roberto Clemente book that was in question as a commissioner's book and book of note. My point being, there was a process for trying to identify books that raised questions. That's what the legislature in Florida put forward on behalf of parents, saying there are books in schools that parents have concerns about. Now, what would some of those books potentially be? Just hypothetically speaking in Florida. How about Genderqueer, a memoir, an explicit pornographic book showing sex acts? We good with that? Are we? Are we good with that? Now, maybe that's not a federal issue. I'll get to that in a minute. How about Flamer, a graphic book about young boys performing sexual acts at a summer camp? Man, would I love my 13-year-old boy to walk into a library and find that on the bookshelf. How about This Book is Gay, a book containing instructions on the ins and outs of gay sex? Now, these are books that were removed in Florida because the legislature took action, and then the various school agencies had to make decisions at the local level and have to go through and pull books and look at them. Now, some of the books that were raised were books involving race. Yes, that is true. And so books about heroes like Rosa Parks and Roberto Clemente. And I'd rather sit here and talk about Roberto Clemente finishing his career sitting right on 3,000 hits and then sadly but heroically dying in a plane crash off the coast of Puerto Rico, taking goods and services to help his fellow mankind as the hero that Roberto Clemente was and that I was raised to believe him to be. And that Rosa Parks was the hero that she was in telling people to go kiss her rear end and pound sand. She wasn't going to sit in the back of the bus. One of the greatest heroes in American history. But there were questions being raised about certain books, and race was part of that. And I would note in this conversation and about this issue of the books going back, I found this to be compelling, that the son of Roberto Clemente Jr., said he owns the book in question, reread the book, said his story is his story. He went through racism. It's something that can't be changed, Clemente Jr. said. But obviously, for the younger students, if it's something that they being school boards and parents, feel is too much for them, they might be able to utilize a different book with the same story, but it's framed differently for them for that age group. Now, I don't know. I have not read the book, okay? I love Roberto Clemente, and my son has read numerous books on Roberto Clemente. But I don't know what's in the book, and I don't know the questions involved about exposing the questions of race to our children. Because in a different story, Roberto Clemente Jr. pointed out, and I don't want to speak for him, I don't want to draw him into this political mess, but he made a point of saying something in the zip code of, if one seeks to have a colorblind society and raise your children that way, then when does one insert issues of racism into the education stream of our children? That is a very reasonable question. Do you do that at kindergarten, second grade, fifth grade, ninth grade? Look, by 11th grade AP history, I was going to Gettysburg and reenacting Pickett's Charge in my 11th grade AP history class. I was going to reenact John Brown's raid in Harper's Ferry over across the mountain from where I grew up in Virginia. Right? I was living and understanding American history in the context of that as an 11th grader, taught by my very liberal 11th grade AP history teacher, whom I loved. That's appropriate. Now, when do you talk about that? I don't know. But that is a conversation between parents and teachers and school boards and, yes, the state legislature. And so in Florida, they passed a law saying we don't want certain things They acted, they pulled some books, and they put a lot of them back, including, I am told, the Rosa Parks book, as they probably should have, not having read the book. This is actually important to this conversation because we're taking something that is the Republican Party here, and I'll get to federalism in a minute, trying to say something pretty simple. Parents should have rights when it comes to raising their children. And that is not a debatable subject. Let me be perfectly clear. It is not debatable. Parents have rights when it comes to how their children are raised. Now, how that's enforced and how you protect them and where you protect them, that's a bit debatable. Parents have the right to know what's being taught. Parents have the right to be heard. Parents have the right to see the school budget and spending. Parents have the right to protect their child's privacy. Parents have the right to be updated on violent activity in their school. Does the gentlelady think any of that is particularly controversial? Let's set aside federalism issues for a minute. Does the gentlelady find any of those rights to be recognized among parents in terms of transparency and the list I just raised at a very high level to be particularly controversial or problematic?
No, but you said the rights of parents are not debatable, but I believe we've heard some expressions here today that would call that into question, because I do think there are people on the other side of the aisle who believe that. Terry McAuliffe said that. John Yarmouth said that once in one of our committee meetings, that the schools have to protect children against their parents at times. That was said by a Democrat in one of our education meetings. And so I do think there are some people who question whether parents have the right to be in charge of their children's education.
I think the gentlelady is correct, and I know we have a lot to get through, but I would just note that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are raising questions about what a school district in a state did and trying to connect that, by the way, not accurately reflecting the end result of that process or the full context of what occurred in that particular instance in Florida, as I just laid out. To then say that a bill here to lay out rights for parents is somehow going to lead to book bans, right? To have parents be able to know what the book is in question that is being put in the library, the books that I've read before, right? That somehow, that if I have the right to know as a parent that the book Flamer, a graphic book about young boys performing sexual acts at a summer camp, that my right to know that that book exists in the school, in the library, somehow that's going to result in immediate book bans. Well, yes, it might result in that book being removed from the library, as it should. But it will be debated where it should be, there, among parents and among school board members and among educators in the community, because now those parents had the right to know what was being put in front of their kids. Would the gentlelady agree?
I agree, and I think Mr. McGovern said the Rosa Parks book has been banned. I question what that means and what that meant at the time, but it's obvious from what you've said, the book has not been banned from that school system.
What I'm telling you is my understanding, and what I've been told in Florida is that they have returned or in the process of returning after a review process of books, including the books that I just read, the books that were in question. These books that are highly suspect, Genderqueer, a memoir, This Book is Gay, a book containing instructions on the ins and outs of gay sex, that there were books removed, and then there were books that were pulled back, reviewed, and then have been restored and put back. I don't know for sure every book in question, but I do know that, for example, the commissioner in Florida has put out the Roberto Clemente book as a book that is a great book and should be read and so forth.
You actually just reminded me of something that occurred, I'm pretty sure, when I was in college, that there were certain books in the library when I was in college that were not on the shelf of the library, but that one had to go to the librarian to get them out. I'm going to do a little investigation of that because now my memory is a little unclear about it, but I'm pretty sure that happened to college students many, many years ago at my college.
And the next point that
Would the gentleman
I would
yield-
make is, briefly,
Yeah, no, I just want to ask unanimous consent to insert into a record an article that appeared on December 22nd about, because I've been absent, but I've heard you said that this book wasn't removed from the school, wasn't banned from
I
the...
did not say that.
Or-
I said that the book was pulled back for review and that I am told it's been put back on the shelf.
Well, according to this article, that's not the case, but nonetheless, pulling a book like this for review, I mean, that's one of the problems with this underlying bill.
Okay,
I
we're
ask
claiming my
unanimous consent to
time
insert
because
this into the record.
the gentleman wasn't here to hear what I said.
Without
Put it in
objection.
context when I was quoting Roberto Clemente Jr. about the issue of race and how if one were to desire to teach children that a colorblind society is preferred, that when you begin teaching about racism and race is a question. Do you do that when they're 3, 5, 10? When do you do that? When do you have a full-blown conversation about the issues of race with a child, depending on how you want to raise them and what your values are in terms of raising a child?
I would hope your values are such that at the earliest age possible, you would tell your child that discrimination is wrong and intolerable, that your child should respect.
But reclaiming my time, the extent to which and how I wish to teach my child about race might be more about teaching people that everybody should be treated equally and not view people through the lens of race, if that is the actual goal and desire of society. But the debate is among parents. The debate should be among parents and school boards. And the only issue that's being raised in this bill is what right parents have to know what is being taught. I noticed that you're not racing to defend the books that I rattled off about Flamer or gender, whatever these books are about gay sex being taught to our kids at, oral sex acts at summer camps. Are we going to defend those books that were removed from libraries? Were those particularly advantageous for the well-being of educating our youth? When report after report in the wake of the shutdown of our schools is demonstrating that our children are now years behind in education proficiency. I would note finally for the gentlelady that much has been made about this being highly violative of federalism principles. Now, I will acknowledge it's not my favorite course of action to have the federal government step in and say, you, local board, shall do X. But I would note, and I'm going to ask the gentlelady this, to the point of the gentleman from Kentucky, that this institution is a little pregnant in how we use the spending power, I think unconstitutionally, by the way, the spending power to demand of all of our local governments that they conform. Would the gentlelady agree that we do that on countless ways and countless bases?
Yes, sir.
And would the gentlelady agree that there are countless provisions in existing law in this exact form for schools that they must follow that include, for example, parents' right to know? Is there not a section already in the code called Parents' Right to Know?
Yes.
And does that Parents' Right to Know section contain requirements that the parents must know, for example, the qualifications of a teacher and be able to get access to the qualifications of a teacher?
Yes.
So is that not already the federal government inserting itself into the local schools and saying that we are going to demand that if you're going to take these federal dollars, you must have the ability and you must provide for parents that right to know?
And by the way, parents get pretty concerned about that sometimes when they find out their child is in a classroom for almost a year with a parent who's not certified, with a teacher who's not certified in that area. And it has caused consternation on the part of parents, as it should, when the local schools are promising that the children will be in the classroom of a certified teacher.
And would the gentlelady also agree that there are numerous requirements in the current code, and I won't go through them all, whether it's the parents' right to know we just talked about, or whether it's assurances from agencies about who's going to be able to get access to schools, including, for example, migrants and so forth, that there's a long list of things that are put as requirements to local school agencies by the federal government under current law.
That was the point I was making earlier.
Right.
Approximately 7% of the money in the local schools comes from the federal government, and I've often perhaps used a little hyperbole, but said about 95% of the rules and regulations are coming from the federal government.
So I would just close with this by saying, while I completely share and co-sponsor the legislation from the gentleman from Kentucky that we should abolish the Department of Education and get out of the business altogether, and while I certainly do not generally like to go down the road that this bill goes down, respectfully, with respect to more requirements on local schools, the reality here is that we are, as I said before, more than pregnant in this regard. And to just simply say that parents have a right to understand what their kids are being taught hardly seems an enormous addition to the already, litany of things that are being required among those local school districts. And I would also then invite my colleagues on the other side of the aisle that if they are as frustrated as I of the extent to which the federal government interferes with local schools, that they can vote for my amendment, which would block grant the dollars to the states and get out of the business altogether. And I'll be offering that amendment and voting for that amendment. I understand some of my colleagues may not because it might frustrate the purpose of this amendment. I get it. But I will be offering that amendment to say all the dollars, strike it, take these ESCA dollars, Title I, and boom, give them to the states. So if we don't like the way they meddle, give it to the states. But that's not going to pass. And so the point here is Republicans are offering an extension here of existing requirements to give rights to parents. Last thing I would say is I'll also be offering an amendment that says that dollars should follow the child. Again, we should get back to the basics here and allow parents to take care of their own children. I yield back.